In April of 2017, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana prosecutors presented to a court the narrative surrounding sexual misconduct it said was committed by 32-year-old 11th grade English teacher Shelley Dufresne.
32-year-old Shelley Dufresne is charged with one count of carnal knowledge of a juvenile. The Destrehan High teacher is accused of having inappropriate sexual contact with a 16-year-old student.
After investigators there say she had sex with a 16-year-old student in September after a Destrehan High School football game. Dufresne teaches English at that school, and the 16-year-old is a student there.
The St. Charles Public School District first reported this to the sheriff's office Friday after reports surfaced that a male student was bragging to his friends about having a sexual relationship with a teacher.
At the beginning of the 2014-2015 school year, she was working at Destrehan High School in Destrehan, Louisiana, an area where about 10,000 people live about 20 miles west of New Orleans near the Mississippi River. One day in August, one of her students was absent from school. The boy was 16 years old and played on the high school football team. Shelley contacted him via Facebook to check on him. The young man, who had turned 19 by the time of Dufresne's 2017 trial and whose identity has never been made public, testified during the proceedings and said that days after the initial Facebook message, the two became intimate when they made out in a classroom at school. Later that evening, the young man said, the teacher picked him up after a football scrimmage. She drove the boy to an isolated location in the town of Metairie, where she parked her car behind a daiquiri shop. "Good morning, sexy," said a text message Shelley sent to the boy the following day. Shelley created a dummy Facebook account under the moniker Madison Mexicano. She would use the account to coordinate liaisons with her young student. The cover photo of the page stated that she loves Mexican boys. The profile image on the page, an image of cartoon character Speedy Gonzalez. She used the account to set up her meetings with the boy. At some point, Shelley teased the boy about being Mexican. The boy is half Hispanic, but is not of Mexican descent. Over the course of the following month, the two would have sex about 40 times in numerous locations, including at the teacher's home in nearby Mons, Louisiana, which she shared with her husband and 3 children. The pair copulated in Shelley's Honda Pilot SUV in various parking lots, in the shed at one of his friend's house, and even at the Kenner, Louisiana apartment of another Destrehan teacher, Rachel Respess. On September 19th, after a Destrehan football game, Dufresne was at the Sports Pub and Grill in Destrehan with colleagues. The boy happened to be there as well with friends of his. Apparently one of the teenager's friends doubtfully questioned him about his supposed relationship with the teacher. This led to a fight outside the establishment. Later, the boy left the restaurant with Shelley and they drove to the apartment of Rachel Respess, 24 years old at the time, a second-year teacher at Destrehan. The year before, she had been the boy's English teacher. Shelley and her young student had sex multiple times that night. At some point, Rachel joined the two for a threesome. The young man testified at trial that Dufresne and Respess began kissing and they performed oral sex on one another. Then the boy continued having sex with Dufresne. The teen was apparently anxious or worn out from intercourse with Shelley because he was not able to achieve an erection. Apparently the boy did not consummate coitus with the younger teacher, but said that he did nevertheless engage in some sort of intercourse with her that night, along with Shelley Dufresne. "All 3 of us were in bed together," he told the court. "We all started having sex together." The young man said that afterward he rode with Shelley to a store to buy cigarettes, and the woman offered to buy him a pill to help him become erect. The boy declined the offer. At some point that night, Rachel passed out. Using his mobile phone camera, the boy videotaped the young woman as she slept. The video apparently showed the teen placing his genitals in the slumbering school teacher's face. The following day, in the football locker room, the teenager unveiled the video to his teammates as proof of the sexual exploits he'd been bragging about for weeks. Rumors began to spread. Shelley contacted the teen from the Madison Mexicano account and scolded him for showing off the digital images in his phone. Soon, school officials caught the scent of the gossip. They contacted the sheriff's office on September 26th. Days later, Dufresne and Respess were arrested. In subsequent court proceedings, the preceding details were revealed. Other revelations included the following. The boy apparently told police that he had taken the video of the sleeping Respess not only as evidence, of the liaison, but also as revenge for an issue that he'd had with her the previous year when he was her student. Authorities never recovered the alleged video of Respess because the teen admitted deleting it along with other photos and text messages out of fear after he and his teacher's activities became a school-wide scandal. At some point, the young man threatened to expose his affair with Mrs. Dufresne after he took exception to her having corrected him in class one day. He apparently also attempted to blackmail the teacher in order to receive better grades and favored treatment at school. The defense cited the teen's covertly recorded video and the alleged attempted blackmail as evidence that the witness cannot be trusted and lamented the fact that the young man had faced no repercussions for his behavior. Dufresne apparently had sex with her pupil in two separate jurisdictions, St. Charles Parish and Jefferson Parish, and faced charges of carnal knowledge of a minor in both. A parish in the state of Louisiana is the equivalent to what is referred to in most other states as a county. In St. Charles Parish Court, Dufresne admitted to having sex with the boy and pleaded to a reduced charge of obscenity in 2015. She was not required to register as a sex offender and receive a suspended sentence. A Jefferson Parish judge heard the Dufresne case in April of 2017. That judge determined that despite Mrs. Dufresne's admission of sexual impropriety with the youth in neighboring St. Charles Parish, prosecutors did not prove the former teacher's alleged crimes in Jefferson Parish. In Shelley Dufresne's second sexual misconduct case, she was found not guilty. She served no jail time. Rachel Respess ultimately was only charged with failure to report a crime following the alleged threesome at her apartment. Subsequent to Shelley Dufresne's acquittal in Jefferson Parish, the court dropped the charges against Respess.
Forget 16. If you were in this bed with me, we would be making love right now.
Peters painted a picture of a woman who went after a little boy. Prosecutors say Anderson first met the victim years ago when she taught him in the 1st grade. She then went on to teach him in the 5th grade. She then brought those lessons home, privately tutoring him in her Riverview house.
In February of 2012, the mother of a 12-year-old student at Mango Elementary School in Sefner, Florida, had a conversation with a teacher who had been tutoring her son. Sefner is a suburb of Tampa, just several miles east of the city. The mother happened to be secretly recording the conversation. During the dialogue, the teacher admitted that she had been sexually intimate with the woman's son. The recording was played in court when Anderson went on trial for lewd and lascivious behavior with a minor.
Did you touch him? Did you?
Anderson eventually admits in the tape they had oral sex.
Yes.
The teacher, Mrs. Ethel Anderson, was a married mother of a 4-year-old child, and she was 29 years old at the time. The mother had worn the wire at the request of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. She'd recently contacted authorities informing them that she believed her son was being abused. During the investigation conducted by the Sheriff's Office into the impropriety, they found that the teacher had been involved with the adolescent for about 3 months, beginning in December of 2011. Anderson was arrested in early March and charged with 9 felonies in the case. She went to trial in September of 2013. Both she and the boy offered testimony during the proceedings. The boy testified that the teacher's advances began one day at the teacher's home in the Riverview neighborhood where she would tutor him. He said, quote, "We sat on the couch and we started doing sexual stuff. At first I told her to stop. She was rubbing my leg, but then it just led to more." The boy said that over the next few months, Anderson fondled him, performed oral sex on him, and that they simulated sexual acts on each other while remaining fully clothed at least 9 times. The boy told the court that he began to feel as though Anderson was his girlfriend. He said he loved her and that Anderson told him that he was her boyfriend and that she loved him. He said she would rub his legs, would kiss him on his ears and neck. He said they would quote-unquote tongue kiss. The pair exchanged hundreds of texts in which they discussed their sexual relationship, referred to one another as baby, and professed their love for one another. The two apparently discussed the possibility of the boy one day fathering a child with the woman. Mrs. Anderson apparently told the boy that she wanted to leave her husband eventually, presumably to be with the boy. According to the prosecution, Anderson bought the boy clothes, took him go-karting, and even brought a turkey over for his family on Thanksgiving. The boy testified that he eventually began to have doubts about his relationship with Anderson. He said, quote, "I'm dating a girl I'm in love with, and she thinks of me as a kid. It doesn't feel right." Anderson cried as she listened to her ex-pupil's testimony. When she was on the witness stand, she claimed that she had not been sexually intimate with the boy. She said that the sex acts she discussed with the preteen via text did not actually happen. She told the jury that she exchanged the explicit messages with the youth as a way of motivating him, a means of getting his attention, and as a form of therapy she offered to him, all in aid of helping him to become a better student.
At the time, with him struggling with school and having behavioral issues and anger issues and acting out at home and not being able to connect with his family the way that he felt and the way his parents felt, that was my purpose, to gain his attention. No, sir, I recognize that it was explicit and inappropriate, but it was just fantasy and not anything that actually ever occurred.
The student apparently resented it when the teacher at some point became more stern with him. They argued, and soon the boy told his mother about the encounters he'd been having with Anderson. Then the boy's mother allowed deputies to wire her for sound before she had a conversation with Anderson. In that conversation, the teacher admitted to having oral sex with the boy. Her arrest soon followed. The jury was unconvinced by Mrs. Anderson's explanation of what had taken place between her and her student.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count one of the charge. The defendant is guilty of lewd or lascivious battery engaged as charged.
It convicted her of 3 counts of lewd and lascivious battery, 4 counts of lewd and lascivious conduct, and 2 counts of lewd and lascivious molestation. In December of 2013, Ethel Anderson was sentenced to 38 years incarceration at a state prison.
Behind bars, accused of having sex with a former student. Kaysville police say a 17-year-old came forward with allegations of improper relations with 34-year-old Brianne Altice. Altice started teaching English at Davis just last year. Police say that they were able to obtain evidence from Altice's home that backed up the teen's story. Now, according to an arrest affidavit here, Altice admitted to at least 2 encounters with that student.
A 16-year-old boy started attending Davis High School in Kaysville, Utah at the beginning of the second semester of the 2012-2013 school year. It was January. He had just moved from another state. He told investigators that the change in scenery had taken him out of his comfort zone. He said that Mrs. Brianne Altice was the first teacher that was sympathetic to him. He was in her English class. He began flirting with Mrs. Altice. He began flirting with her a lot, he said. He said that Brianne would laugh it off, but he was persistent, and Brianne gave only light resistance to his advances. "If I was 18, I know you would date me," the boy testified he would tell her often. The boy said he would tell Mrs. Altice 4 or 5 times a day how pretty she looked. He left notes on her desk. They became closer. The teenager would often confide in her. For example, one day he told her that he was worried that he might not pass an upcoming drug test, so Brianne took him to Walgreens to buy a home test. He said he ended up kissing her for the first time in the classroom. He said he continued requesting her company and they started meeting in the morning before classes began. They'd rendezvous in the parking lot of a church not far from the school. There they'd mostly talk at first, but then the kissing became more frequent. The first time they had sex was in her car in that parking lot on a morning in March. Later that month, she drove the boy to her home in South Weber for sex while her husband was out of town. This happened twice more. The teenager began skipping his other classes in favor of hanging out in Mrs. Altice's classroom. He was deemed truant. He was failing nearly every class but Brianne's. They saw one another that summer. The last time they had sex was on his 17th birthday, he said. In June, they ceased seeing one another. The young man began to feel guilty about his relationship with the teacher. The following school year, he transferred to Viewmont High School. In October, the boy contacted police and reported the impropriety between himself and Brianne. He described to them the layout of her house and tattoos she had on her body. Police showed up at Brianne's home with a warrant to take pictures of the bedroom and of her tattoos, which they found matched what the boy had described. Brianne was arrested and the school placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. When media reports of Brianne's arrest first surfaced, a 17-year-old boy took the news very hard. This was a different boy from the one that had reported the teacher. He was very emotional. He cried, he punched a brick wall in anger and fractured his hand. Then he went to the assistant principal's office and informed him that he too had been having intercourse with Altice. He also informed the police. Like the first boy, the second boy was also in one of Brianne's English classes that year. The second boy was also a teaching assistant to her. In April, Brianne and the boy began exchanging text messages. Then one day, in a car in a church parking lot, they met and made out excessively, according to the boy. Soon she began visiting him at home. On the second visit, he said they started kissing when she entered. Then they went down to the basement where they kissed some more and removed their clothes. They had sex multiple times and stopped seeing one another when the 2012-2013 school year ended. A month after Brianne's arrest, her husband filed for divorce and said he wanted custody of their 3 children. In December, she was charged on multiple rape charges, first-degree felonies in the state of Utah. During a preliminary hearing, the second boy referred to Brianne Altice as a, quote, teacher with benefits. A civil lawsuit filed against Mrs. Altice claimed that students were aware of the improper relationships and that there was a running joke at the school, quote, who's Mrs. Altice sleeping with now, unquote. Investigators discovered yet another teen with whom Mrs. Altice had been intimate. The third young man had become friends with her when he was a junior and started sitting in on her classes while skipping his own. The sexual relationship between them began at the start of the 2013-2014 school year. They initially shared a 10-minute encounter in his car. The intimacy progressed during lunches and after school. Some encounters were interrupted because she had to go pick up her children. They continued seeing one another even after her arrest, as she was waiting to be formally charged and as her husband was preparing to file for a divorce. The intimacy continued all the way up to August 2014. The young man testified reluctantly during a pretrial hearing and said of the proceedings, quote, it's ridiculous and she doesn't deserve to be here, unquote. He was 18 at this point. He said he still had feelings for Brianne. He glanced at her occasionally during his testimony. Prosecutors levied new charges against Brianne in light of the third improper relationships discovery. In January of 2015, her bail was revoked and she was taken into custody. She pled guilty in April of 2015 and the prosecution dropped several of the charges. In July, Brianne Altice was sentenced to no less than 2 years and no more than 30 years of incarceration. In April of 2019, she was released from prison on parole. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, subscribing, commenting, and all that good stuff. I've got new content coming soon. Stay tuned. Peace.